So if you don't know who George Galloway is, he's a tough-talking truth teller that we need more of in this world. And if you haven't seen the clip of when he talked to our own Congress here in the United States, you should all check that out. In fact, I'll put a link to it underneath this video. But what happened with George Galloway most recently is I was a guest on his show. He had a great show on talk radio, and he got sacked. Well, here's the headline from the BBC. George Galloway sacked by talk radio over allegedly an anti-Semitic tweet. Now, you know, they do this to the people who tell the truth about war. They do this to the people who tell the truth about the banks. They do this to the people who go against the establishment, and that's certainly what George Galloway is. Here's what happened. He put out a tweet. This is the tweet that got him in trouble. He said, "Congratulations to the great people of Liverpool, to the memory of the socialist miner Bill Shankly, to the fallen 96, to those who fought for justice for them, and to the Liverpool Dockers, no Israeli flags on the cup." So that's what got him. That's what got him sacked, because they said that was anti-Semitic. Although he's talking about a state and a state's flag. Let's bring him on. We have him with us, ladies and gentlemen. He is a former politician now, but he's still in politics, ladies and gentlemen, because he's the victim of it. Let's give him a warm welcome. George Galloway's right here with us. Hi, George. How are you?
Oh, it's an honor to be with you, and your interview with me on my radio show will live long in the memory, unless they somehow erase the tape recording of it. I'm not sure what their policy on that will be. But as you read that out, I had to laugh to myself because, of course, Israel is a political construct, it is a state, and it's perfectly permissible to be hostile to a state. After all, most people in the United States were hostile to the former Soviet Union. It didn't make them Russophobes. It didn't mean they hated Russian people. It meant they hated the political system under which the Russian people then lived. So it's absurd, but to be honest, Jimmy, it started long before that. On the Skripal case, you remember the
Yes.
Salisbury case, the attempted assassination, allegedly, of a former Russian agent in an English town. I took immediately a stridently querulous stand on that Skripal case, because I didn't believe that the British government's narrative added up, and nothing that's happened since has dissuaded me from that view. And the state regulator, Ofcom, immediately moved in right after my broadcast, even though I was the only show on mainstream radio, on the entirety of mainstream media, that took the line that the state narrative didn't add up. And they put us into special measures. They threatened to fine the owner a huge sum of money. The owner, Rupert Murdoch, doesn't really like paying out money for left-wing troublemakers like me. So the writing was on the wall from that minute, and they were just looking for an opportunity to get rid of it.
So you went against the state narrative in the Skripal poisoning, and everything that we've been hearing from the intelligence community over the last few years have been complete lies to get us into more wars. We've been debunking them here on this show. And so, like, for instance, the gas attack in Syria, in Assad, in Douma, right? So Robert Fisk debunked that immediately, but the mainstream news media and all the politicians went along with this incredulous story that Assad, while winning the war, would do the one thing that would draw the United States back into it, which goes against logic. It doesn't make any sense. And of course, that's why the intelligence community was pushing it. So we go against that. You go against that. Then there's also the Skripal poisoning, which completely made no sense. Why wouldn't they just push him out of a balcony? Instead, they would use the one chemical that could be traced directly back to Russia. It doesn't make any sense. So you also went against that, which is going against the establishment narrative and the government narrative. And so there was a state regulator that got on. How does that work?
Well, we have a state regulator. We have the state broadcaster, the BBC, and a state regulator for everyone else. That state regulator is called Ofcom, and it has absolute power. It can put a station off the air. It can get people dismissed from their jobs. It can get programs pooled. It's George Orwell, 1984, 21st century style. Of course, they never investigate anyone who's within the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy. And I was the only mainstream broadcaster who was broadcasting from outside that prevailing orthodoxy. And I paid the price. But you know, every cloud has a silver lining. I'm starting on Sunday. The show's back, the mother of all talk shows, coast to coast in the United States, on FM in DC, on AM, elsewhere in the US, Sputnik Radio, and I'll be on Sputnik.com, of course, across the rest of the world, and live streamed on YouTube like you. So I actually think my audience will be even bigger, although the audience was the biggest rating show of its kind in the country. I believe our audience will only get bigger. You know, the book they try to ban always goes to the top of the bestseller list, Jimmy.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, I mean, so you're, and for them to ban you for the, it's not like you're just a nightclub comedian like myself. You're a former member of British Parliament for nearly 30 years. And you actually did the right thing, and you stood up against the Iraq War, and Tony Blair expelled you from the Labour Party over that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like a badge of honor, right?
Yeah. I've been a rebel without a pause, but then there's so much to rebel against. And it wouldn't be my ordinary choice in life. Everyone likes a quiet life, a peaceful life, but all these provocations keep coming at you. Julian Assange, the Iraq War, the Syria War, the Afghan War, the Libya War, the crimes against the people in the neoliberal economic policies of successive governments all of my life. If I could lay down my arms, I would, but I couldn't do so with honor, whilst all these criminals are still running the world, and others pay a much higher price. I've got to tell you, Jimmy, today my mind is on my friend Jamal Khashoggi, whose face I'd kissed, whose hand I'd held, who'd whispered in my ear, and I in his. We're back now contemplating the Saudi Arabian regime murdering him, premeditated murder, cutting him into pieces. That ear that I whispered in, dismembered from its head. That hand that I shook, cut from his arm. It's these crimes, if you laid them end to end, they'd circumnavigate the world. And the people committing them just go on doing so and go on getting away with it. I would never have believed, and I'm not a naive, after the disaster of the Iraq War and everything that came out of it, that the same people, backed by the same media, would go on to commit the same crime over and over and over again. I honestly thought that Einstein was exaggerating when he said that doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result was the definition of insanity.
So do you feel, just to put up, I want to get back, and so we can tie up this controversy that you had for being sacked in the first place.
Yeah.
So is it what's the general feeling across the pond on this? Is it of course the establishment media is going to call you and the war machine is going to call you an anti-Semite for criticizing Israel. Is that how you see it happening? And is that and that's what so how go ahead.
Doesn't wash, Jimmy. Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party to its best result since 1945. And this in the teeth of wall-to-wall allegations that he, too, was an anti-Semite. Nothing could be further from the truth. All of our idols are Jewish, are ideological, are musical. Bob Dylan, freewheeling's right behind me. Karl Marx is on my bookshelves. The idea that someone with my politics could conceivably be a racist, because that's what anti-Semitism is so outlandish, so far from the truth that it doesn't actually cut through in the public mind. By the way, you'll soon be getting it if you're not already. Bernie Sanders, himself Jewish, will, if he is the candidate or a serious candidate to be the candidate, he too will be accused of being an anti-Semite. Noam Chomsky is accused of being an anti-Semite. Professor Norman Finkelstein is accused of being an anti-Semite. This is just a trick that they play to try and disarm, terrify, make us self-censor our criticism of the state of Israel and our support for the Palestinian people.
Well, they've already, so when people in the United States want to oppose the state of Israel's apartheid state and their oppression of the Palestinians, they want to do it in a nonviolent way. So the same way we did it to South Africa when I was a kid, people are trying to do that now. They want to put individuals to stop supporting the economy of Israel, and it's called BDS. And the politicians here in the United States, they're so under the thumb of the Israeli lobby, the AIPAC lobby, that they've passed laws to make that illegal in the United States. In the United States, it's illegal to protest another country. They've tried to make that illegal here over and over. So yeah, it's come here, and they call BDS, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democratic Party, calls BDS anti-Semitic. And that could, again, so any action, there is a thing called anti-Semitism in the world, but when you call people protesting the state of Israel anti-Semitic, you've now watered down and diluted that term, because that's not what it means. And if someone standing up against apartheid is an anti-Semite, now you've just wrecked that word for yourself. You get what I'm saying?
Jimmy, I was one of the only people on the left in Britain who worked undercover for the ANC in apartheid South Africa, moving from town to town, city to city, township to township, dodging the apartheid police, being caught once and punched in the face repeatedly in Guguletu Township police station. And you know something? Every house I lived in, every car I was driven in, every dinner I ate, every rand in my pocket was given to me by Jewish members of the African National Congress. The armed wing of the African National Congress was led by Joe Slovo, one of the greatest Jewish men on the earth. His wife, Jewish, Ruth First, Albie Sachs, Dennis Goldberg. I could go on the rest of tonight. Max and Audrey Coleman, Adam Brating, these great Jewish heroes of the anti-apartheid struggle. So Jews don't have to be with apartheid. They don't have to support apartheid. In South Africa, thousands of them did not and are heroes in the history books as a result of it.
So well said. I didn't know that. So what seems to be happening in the UK mirrors what is happening in the United States with Bernie Sanders. So we have a government of the banks and the military-industrial complex that is not responsive to its people. And so we finally find a politician who isn't in bed with those people that we're supposed to be fighting against. And there's a groundswell of support. Of course, the media then attacks Bernie Sanders, and they shut him out. And now people are going around the media, coming to places like this. They're going to social media, YouTube, and other places like this. I'm on public radio also, coast to coast here in the United States. So they come to places like this to get that information that they can't get. Now, why do you think it's such a similar situation at this time in the United States and the UK?
Well, you've just described the revolution that's taking place, has been now for a couple of decades. Through which we have become free of the billionaire owners of media stations and publishers of mighty newspapers. You know, I'm much older than you. When I was starting out, in order to get the word out, we had to type a stencil, put it on a drum filled with ink, turn a handle, produce a smudgy leaflet, cut it into 4, and then go out onto the street and find somebody that would take it from us, with people looking at us as if we were crazy. Now, at the touch of a button, People in Britain and the United States are watching this show. We built support for the show on Twitter and Facebook earlier tonight. We'll spread it across the internet in the days and weeks to come. This is a revolution. That's why they're scared of us, because suddenly they no longer have a monopoly on information, a monopoly on analysis, monopoly on opinion. That's why, if they could, they'd put you and I behind the grim prison walls with Julian Assange is now. So we better go careful, as we say here in London.
So that's exactly what we've been saying here at this show, that, for instance, something like Russiagate is being used by the security state to increase their control over social media, because the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016 showed that people could get their information by going around the establishment media. And so the establishment needs to get control of that narrative again. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of this. Facebook is now in bed with a group called the Atlantic Council here in the United States, which is just an arm of the government. And so they brag that they take down Facebook pages at the behest of the Atlantic Council and, by the way, the State of Israel. So that's, are you afraid of that kind of censorship?
Yes, but I'd be more afraid of self-censorship, what Francis Bacon called the arrow that flies in the night, that nobody sees, but which leads Jimmy Dore or Galloway or someone else to decide not to take on questions, because there will be trouble for us if we do. And that's already been happening for a long, long time. But I think the internet is the ultimate genie that's out of the bottle. Of course, Facebook can begin to act like a corporate police officer or police department. But we can make our own Facebook. It's not rocket science. It's just a blackboard on which you write. We can make our own Twitter. We can proliferate all these methods of communication. And people go to people they trust. The reason you are a video star as well as a radio star is because people trust you and they'll follow you. If they shut you down here, you go there. They shut you down there, you come back here. We are a moving target. Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
Okay. All right. So what do people make of, people in the United States are pretty much unaware of what's happening in the UK. They think Brexit is all about racism. They don't understand the underlying neoliberal policies that bring something like that on. They're not really aware of who Jeremy Corbyn is. Is it in the UK? Are they aware of Bernie Sanders and what's actually happening here and how much of a failed state the United States actually is?
Well, we are two people divided by a common language, as Oscar Wilde said. So some of it's lost in translation. And of course, the public are not perfect in their understanding and appreciation of things. But generally speaking, I'll tell you what, I just went to see a West End play by a Pulitzer Prize winner American writer. The play is called Sweat. It's set in a Rust Belt town in the NAFTA period, when jobs were headed south and blue-collar union jobs were being axed and people thrown onto the scrap heap, the very process by which Donald Trump got elected, actually, in the first place. And I just said to my wife when we came out, for NAFTA, read European Union. It's exactly the same. The people who voted for Brexit, and I was one of them, were doing so because they had seen Britain become a rust belt in the Midlands, in the north of England, in the south of Wales, in the southwest of the country. You see, if you live in this lovely Elysian field where I do here in London, membership of the EU is a wonderful thing. You can get your espresso macchiato served cheaply by a pretty and efficient barmaid from Eastern Europe. You can get a joiner to come and fix your door, a glazier to come and fix your window, and so on, from Eastern Europe. Cheap, knocked down. But what about the British workers? The British workers that have been displaced or their wages driven down by the NAFTA, by the single market, and its customs union that is the European Union that was rejected. Brexit is a left-wing idea, not a right-wing idea. My political father, Tony Benn, the greatest socialist leader these islands ever produced, he would have been, if he was still alive, the leader of the Brexit campaign. We don't hate foreigners. My wife's a foreigner. I've got 4 mixed-race children. I've represented more people of colour in the British Parliament than any member of Parliament in the history of this country, and in 3 different cities, by the way. We don't hate foreigners. We hate globalized capitalism. We hate being ruled and governed by people we didn't elect and cannot remove. And that's true in your country as much as it is in mine. So it was a cry of the disinherited, the disenfranchised, the poor, the low paid against their rulers. That's what Brexit was. Nothing right-wing about it. All the members of the European Union are overwhelmingly white countries. Where's the racism here? Black people are being deported back to Jamaica that have been here for 40 years, and nobody raises a word against it in the Windrush scandal. But you propose to not send anybody home, but now put restrictions on the number of Slovakians or Bulgarians who can come and live and work in Britain because the economy cannot bear any further pressure, and the workers cannot bear any further downward pressure on their wages and their conditions. And people call you a racist. This is liberal claptrap. I'm a socialist, Jimmy, but never confuse me with a liberal. I'm not a liberal. And the more I see of these liberals, these pussy hats, these identity politics freaks, the more I hate the idea of the word liberal.
Yes, I agree with you. The liberal class is here not to help you. They're not. No. They're here to be the pretty face of corporatism, and that's
the lipstick on the pig.
That's exactly right. So you're saying that economic insecurity and economic deprivation, which is caused by globalism and neoliberalism, which people don't, we call it corporatism, worldwide, which is a race to the bottom, which is, hey, I can get somebody in Sri Lanka to make a shirt cheaper, or Bangladesh for a nickel less than here. So your job goes over there. In the United States, they so have captured our government that they get the government to give them a tax break for doing that. Right. So that's how messed up things are. People don't realize that. And they just want to go, well, people voted for Trump because of racism. People voted for Brexit because of racism. They don't understand that in America, 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 30 million people don't even have health care. And half the country is poor or low income. I say you call that a failed system. We have a failed system in the United States. And now people for the last 2.5, 3 years have all pretended our problems are Donald Trump.
Well, I couldn't put it better than you just have. I did stay up late to watch Trump's re-election platform rally in Florida last night. And I just wondered if all those T-shirts and all those MAGA hats had been made in the United States of America to make it great again. But then I saw the labels, and all of it was made, of course, in China, because that's what capitalism does. It's not that the Chinese stole your lunch. It's that the capitalists took your lunch to China. That's what happened. It's not China's fault. It's not the fault of the Chinese workers. Your main enemy is at home, not abroad, not in Moscow, not in Beijing. It's your own ruling class that has cheated you and has robbed you. And when they had no further use for you, they've thrown you out like a limp rag. And that's what we've got to rally people against. And the reason I support Bernie Sanders, though of course I don't have a vote and can't even make a donation to him, that would be illegal. But I support him with all my heart not because of his foreign policy. I disagree with many aspects of his foreign policy, but because I'm persuaded that he will stand up for the blue collar workers, white workers and black workers with blue collars on, the people who make things, the people who once made things that we marveled at. You know, when I grew up, Jimmy, I used to look at American cars. I used to look at American refrigerators. I used to look at American jukeboxes. I used to look at all the wonderful things that you made. And now you're not making them at all because it's cheaper to have these things made somewhere else.
So it's interesting. You know, I just had Ron Paul on our show before you, and I think he agrees with a lot of things we say, especially when we talk about anti-interventionism and the war machine and how the capitalists have worked against the people. He has a different solution. I asked him if he knew if he could give me any example of where capitalists self-regulated themselves into not poisoning the world and screwing workers for profits, and he couldn't because it doesn't exist. So the idea that there are free markets is a misnomer. There's no such thing as a free market. Markets wasn't created in nature, and Jesus Christ didn't create them either. Markets are created by guys who have stuff to sell and they want to protect themselves. That's how markets get created, okay? And so when people say, oh, government regulations, they should call them government protections because the protections, the regulations, they're supposed to be there to protect us. But if you call them regulations, it sounds icky. And why is the government doing all this stuff to us and help? So, but what people don't realize, I don't know what the case is in the UK, but in the United States, the government is run by corporations. They don't work for the voters or the citizens. They work for their donors, which are the corporations and the oligarchs and the billionaires. We've had studies done here in universities at Cambridge that showed that if you're in the bottom 80% of wage earners, what you want is never reflected in legislation. So we live in an oligarchy. We only have we pay fealty to democracy in the United States. Is it the same way in the UK?
Yes, I mean, they should wear these NASCAR suits with the badges of all their sponsors clearly on view. But of course they don't. It's the hidden hand of corporatist corruption that is involved in the lobby system. It's not even necessarily handing over monies in brown envelopes. It's the feeling that they are all part of the same club, and that when they're finished in politics, they'll go through the revolving door and they'll get jobs, highly paid positions with these companies who they have been favoring with their policies throughout their time in public office. Tony Blair, 3 times Prime Minister of Britain, is currently receiving £9 million a year from the Saudi Arabian dictatorship, from the Crown Prince that murdered Jamal Khashoggi, according to the United Nations report this very day. Nobody ever asks them, no journalist ever asks them, should you be taking 9 million blood-soaked banknotes from these people? And that's only a tiny part of his. Tony Blair's worth £100 million. He owns 28 homes. He's being repaid by the banks, by the regimes that he favored when he had the political power to do so. That's the ultimate in corruption.
So Jeremy Corbyn actually seems like he has more power than Bernie Sanders for sure in the United States, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to cheat Bernie Sanders. Well, they're cheating him right now, but whether they will successfully cheat him out of the nomination is another thing. But then they'll probably, all the people who call themselves liberals will probably vote for Donald Trump over Bernie Sanders anyway. One of them already admitted it on MSNBC, and they had to shut him up right away because the secret's out. Hey, we just added St. Louis and Honolulu to our live tour schedule. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our live shows. We might be coming to your town. Go check right now at jimmydorcomedy.com. And if you like the show and want to support it, become a premium member. You can become a patron or through PayPal, or go right to jimmydorcomedy.com and become a premium member. That's the best way. We'll see you at a live show.